Am I right in saying that you're drinking out of a hard aches mug?
I'm a yard act.
Oh, Yard Act, Yard Act. I
Yeah.
thought it was Hard Act. Damn, I thought I
No,
was going to be super smart there, but no, it was Yard Act.
no, it's yard act. Are you in England, Frank?
I am. I'm in Essex.
Oh, so is that home?
It is home, yeah. It's you sound like you're an Englishman yourself.
Yeah, I'm from Grimsby. I'm from Lincolnshire. But I've been in.
Grimsby, very nice.
Yeah, I don't suppose you've
Awesome.
ever played there, have you?
I have played in Grimsby. There was one of the best hardcore bands in British history comes from Grimsby, a band called Imbalance.
I don't even know them. Okay.
They were a kind of the late '90s, early 2000s hardcore band called Imbalance. They're the fastest hardcore band out of the UK ever, and they were amazing. And my first touring band used to play with them all the time.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. Yeah,
There
cool.
we go.
Anyway, I haven't got too long, so
Yes,
15 minutes.
yeah. Sorry, we'll be here all day.
Yeah, that would be nice. But yeah, I've interviewed a couple of times before actually. Once at when you played at the Rosemount, and we did a little live interview there, and another time it was on the phone. But anyway, that's cool. Let's get into it. So Frank, you've got your 9 albums in 25 years. You've been doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you sort of hope for when you started in the late 90s? Started in
Oh,
this.
well, it's an interesting question, and it goes to what I was just chatting about with 90s hardcore because I was a pretty stereotypically furious DIY punk for quite a long time. Well, for quite a long time. It felt like a long time at the time. So my ambitions at the beginning were probably to headline the Red Eye in London, and probably to do a European squat tour, and probably to smash capitalism. Not necessarily in that order, but you know, that was. I mean, I think that there was a big sort of moment in my life when my second sort of touring band was called Million Dead, and our bass player like worked at a record label and knew what a manager and an agent did and all this kind of thing. And there was a bit of a kind of transitional moment there for me personally in kind of expanding my horizons a bit. But realistically, I think if you could go back 25 years and tell me that would be a 41-year-old professional musician who, touch wood, fingers crossed, has no prospect of stopping doing this anytime immediately soon due to public disinterest, should we say? I'd be stoked. No matter how kind of like cool and punk I try and be about it, I think I'd at least secretly be stoked.
Absolutely, yeah. So, would you have any advice for the very young Frank Turner who's starting out in 1998? Now we're looking at it from a 41-year-old point of view, Frank Turner.
I mean, I'm always tempted to say no to that question simply because I think learning as you do is the more interesting part of life generally. I think that there are moments, excuse me, the moments that I kind of look back on with regret in my life. And incidentally, sidebar, anyone who says they has no regrets is a sociopath. Um, uh, the, the moments I regret are the moments when I was less than considerate to the people around me, which I think everybody is at some point or other. But there are definitely moments when I could have been more gentle and considerate to some of the people in my life, and I think about that quite a lot. I guess the only other thing I'd say would be to say stretch. I have damaged myself physically pretty profoundly through 25 years of jumping around on stage, and I completely and utterly annihilated my back and also my knee when I was about 10 years ago. I had to have a long sort of operations and hospital treatments and stuff. And the physiotherapist was just kind of like, well, I mean, you're basically a kind of athlete. What's your stretching regime? And given being a kid who got picked last for football and hated sports conceptually, I was like, what are you talking about? I think I often wonder that if I had stretched more when I was younger, if I would be more mobile these days.
I think that's a myth, Frank. I really do. I think if you don't stretch, don't worry about it. Don't start now. I spoke to Laura Jane Grace maybe about 2 years ago when she was turning 40. And the day, it was a few days after she turned 40, and she said, I've broken my foot yesterday. I feel tired. When I get out of bed, my back's hurting. And she said, I feel as though I've got to slow down. And now I think, Frank, you're 40 now or 41.
I'm 40 41. Well, it's interesting because I mean, basically, around the time of that kind of back incident, and the thing was, like, I had to have an operation, and then they said just take 3 months off and you'll be fine. And it was about 10 days before the start of a 3 month long tour, and I was just like, absolutely not. So I did all my physio on the road, and didn't slow down at all. So at that point, that said, in the last few years, particularly prior to the pandemic. I mean, I don't have kids, but a lot of people in my band have kids now. A lot of people in my crew have kids now. We're all I live in a house with my wife and my cat, and it's wonderful, and I love it. And I think it occurred to me a conveniently long time ago that this is a marathon, not a sprint. I want to keep doing this in some shape or form for a long time, and that therefore it was probably worth easing off the gas a little bit. We've presentationally managed to kind of like disguise that from people. People still think I'm on tour all the time, which I'm not. I'm on tour a lot of the time, but we take breaks, we go home, we have holidays, none of us want to actually kill ourselves through touring. I certainly don't. So we are, touring has definitely changed. It's no longer the endless stag do that it might once have pretended to be. I had a wonderful tour a few years ago. I toured with Jason Isbell in the States, and it was so. Are you familiar with Jason?
No.
He's an American country singer, and his whole sort of backstory is that he was a catastrophe alcoholic. He got sober and then became enormously successful. And the whole tenor of his touring party, because he doesn't drink, obviously, but people in his band do, but it's more they'll have a glass of wine after a show before bed rather than like 18 Jaeger bombs or whatever. And he had his daughter on tour with him, and just the whole vibe was really sort of, to use an unpunk word, adult. For me and my crew, it was really sort of delightfully eye-opening to kind of be like, oh, there is a way of doing this that isn't just kind of like going completely insane every single night and then coming home and trying to recover. So, sustainability on a kind of physical and personal level is something I think about a lot.
I think there are different punk stages. I mean, I was a 14-year-old punk, and if you look at me now, I probably I can't look further from it. But I think, and I think especially in Australia, that whole idea of a punk, how you look, is completely different to how it is or was in England.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we could dive into this for hours, so I'll try and keep this brief. But I think there is an interesting kind of sociological thing about punk, because punk, if you look at the original movement, and indeed kind of hardcore in the 80s, was all sort of predicated on the idea that it was going to last for maybe 4 years at the most. And you've now got Bad Religion doing a 40th anniversary tour or whatever it is, or coming up on that certainly. And at a certain point, I still think Bad Religion are punk as hell, but you have to kind of recalibrate your idea of what punk means at a certain point if you're now in your 50s or 60s or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely, I agree. Frank, your latest album, I mean, it's a new album from a Perth point of view. You're going to be touring with that FTHC. Yes. But that came out, I mean, you must have written that maybe 3 years ago. It came out 18 months ago. So for us, it's going to be new, but for you, it's not going to be new. Is that a problem? It's like, oh God, I'm going to do all these tracks again.
No, goodness, no. I mean, I'm always. I mean, first of all, I'm stoked to play any songs for any people anywhere. To be blunt, but also like I've been doing this long enough now to understand the sort of the inherent time delays. I finished a new album on Thursday last week. It's not going to be out for another probably 7 months because of things like vinyl lead times and promotional duties and all the rest of it. But so I'm kind of like, I'm pretty zen about this these days. Do you know what I mean? There was definitely a point in my life when that kind of thing used to wind me up. But the flip side of it is this. I mean, first of all, in the given set list for any tour, I try and write a set list from the point of view of an audience member, and we will play at least one song off every record I've done. That's a sort of a point of pride for me in writing a set list, and to play something from every era, to use a Taylor Swiftism. But I went to see the movie the other day. It's very good. I think that. Yeah, but it's like I'm filled with joy at the fact that I get to write songs that I wrote 15, 20 years ago. I mean, how amazing is that? Like, that anybody's still interested. I certainly think that when I wrote the songs on my first record, the idea that I would still be playing them in 20 years was sort of bananas. It's a nice thing.
So are you still, I think you still like playing the sing-along ones. I think this is true, where you like the crowd to sort of join in, photosynthesize or tattoos and stuff. Are you still going to be playing those sort of tracks when you come to Australia?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the pretentious way of putting it is to say that there's something interesting occurs in a space when the barrier between performer and audience starts to crumble, and it becomes more of a collectivist endeavor than a sort of, I mean, the thing that always appealed to me about punk in the first place was the idea that it was non-hierarchical. Now, a stage is a raised piece of flooring, so there's some implied hierarchy there regardless of what you do. And I spent some of my teenage years trying to analyze if there was a way around that. But nevertheless, like, when that collective feeling breaks out, that's fantastic. That's a posh way of saying that I like a sing along. And there's the kind of like Nirvana not playing Smells Like Teen Spirit, Radiohead not playing Creep kind of thing. I mean, obviously, I've never had a song that's quite on that level, but nevertheless, it's like take 3 minutes of your 2 hour show to play the song that got everyone in the room. For God's sake, it's the world is full. The world is drowning with bands who don't have one song like that, and so have a little bit of kind of grace about it.
Absolutely. I remember, I don't know if you know Lloyd Cole, but my wife always tells me this story that he didn't like doing his well-known tracks. So when he did his well-known tracks live, he intentionally changed the lyrics so that the rest of the crowd
Right.
couldn't sing along. And she said it was so annoying.
That
Yeah.
is so annoying. You know what? Many years ago, we did a festival with Lynyrd Skynyrd, or what remains of Lynyrd Skynyrd. And what was fantastic about it is that there was very clearly an agreement between the band and the audience, which is we're going to play about an hour of stuff that not that many of you are going to know, but that's what we want to play. And at the end, we're going to play Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird. And everyone was like, "That's fair," and it was a great gig.
That's what you want. Yeah, yeah, cool. Frank, there's a couple of tracks on the latest album. One in particular, I think that's my favorite, Non-Serbian. That's a great opening track for that album.
Thank you.
But it's the real punkiest track, and then it's
Yeah,
a bit
definitely.
mellower and then up and down. So
Yeah,
did
yeah.
it take a while to write that one?
Well, so I have a side project that's currently called Mingle Hard, which is a sort of noisy, hardcore noise rock sort of thing. And like I started writing that, I had that riff, that which it sort of implies a certain vocal approach and all the rest of it. And just immediately on writing it went, well, that goes in that pile. And then I was just sort of thinking about things quite a lot, and I just thought, well, it doesn't have to. And actually, the great advantage of being a solo artist, no one can complain that I've kind of like morphed beyond my origins in terms of terminology. I mean, it's literally my name, so I can put out whatever I want under my name. And it was really fun to do that track. I mean, the whole record, there is a sense of kind of return, I think, to FTHC, and a lot of that it comes from we spent a lot of time in the summer of 2019, just before the pandemic, playing punk rock festivals and playing a bunch of shows with NoFX and Pennywise and people like that. And I just felt really at home for the first time in quite a long time. And it was just like, oh, a lot of my career has been sort of punk adjacent musically and presentationally, and launching myself headfirst back into the adjective free punk world felt great. I felt really comfortable there, and it was like, oh, maybe I'll make a record that goes with this. And Non-Serviam felt like the best way to introduce that idea.
Okay. And there's also a couple of tracks on the album, Fabulous and Miranda, that sound quite cathartic from your point of view. Would that be right to say, I'm glad I put that down, I feel better?
Yes. Yeah, yes. In the overall zoomed out thing. I mean, there was a fair amount of stress for me. Choosing to write about that kind of thing was quite daunting at a certain point. And secondly, I do think this goes in part to what I was saying about consideration earlier. Like, I mean, I had to run those songs past my mum and my dad, although my relationship with her is slightly more complicated. But I don't want to upset my mum with things that I say in public. Do you know what I mean? Or at least if I can avoid it. There's a conflict there because I also think that art should be unguarded and all the rest of it. It was quite a long process to sort of decide to talk about that stuff for the first time in any sort of public setting. But yes, in the final analysis, I'm glad that I did. It was quite cathartic. It was quite cool to get that off my chest.
So in terms of touring and making music nowadays, Frank, in 2023, do you make your money from the touring and a little bit on selling vinyl? Because, with like iTunes and Spotify, you don't make money out of that anymore. So how do you make it?
Sure. Is it mostly touring? And there are days when I feel like my job description, my business card should say traveling t-shirt salesman, because we make a lot of money out of merch as well, or a lot of the money that we make, I should say. Let's phrase that correctly. But I mean, it's a funny old thing. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy called Franz Nicolai. He's in the Hold Steady, he's the keys player in the Hold Steady. He's a dear friend of mine. He does solo records as well, and he's a deep and interesting and wise man. And he made a point to me many years ago, which I love, which is just that, like, in the long historical view, the period between, let's say, the 1950s and the early 2000s, when bands could make money by making one recording and then staying at home, was an anomaly. Do you know what I mean? That wasn't the usual thing. And before that particular period of recording technology, as a band, you made your living by touring as a musician or by playing live.
Mm.
You were either a troubadour or you were a court musician. Those are your two options. And in a funny way, that is now true again, because you either essentially exist in the kind of like syncs and sponsorship world, or you're a touring musician. And I'm fortunate that playing live is my favorite thing in the whole world. So it's not a chore for me to do that. But I do think, we all got quite comfortable with this idea that you could record 45 minutes of music and then just sit around at home raking in the cash. And that does seem quite odd in retrospect.
Absolutely. Frank, I'm going to let you go in a minute, but I'm going to ask you a really quick fire questions just to finish. No time to think about it, right? Favorite Frank Turner song?
I'm going to be boring and choose something off the new record that you've not heard yet. There's a song on the new record called Somewhere in Between that I'm very proud of.
Okay. Neil Young or Joe Strummer?
Oh, God. On balance, Neil Young.
Stop, that's it.
Okay, fine. Neil Young. Yeah, there we go.
Best punk song ever?
Everything Sucks by Descendants.
Okay, and the last one. Do you know what number show you'll be playing when you come and play in Perth?
Not off the top of my head, but 2,820 something probably.
I don't know myself, but yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I know every day because it's written on the set list, and I just take the previous days and add one. There are people who think I have a sort of like Rain Man ability to remember all my shows, and it's not true.
Fair enough. Frank, I've got to go, so I appreciate your time. And
what a pleasure. Are you coming down for the Perth show?
I'll be there for the Perth show, yeah, definitely.
Well, I feel like I need to. You and I both should dig into the Neil Young versus Joe Strummer thing in much greater depth, because that might be the most profound question I've been asked in quite a long time.
Cool. I'd love to. Yeah, maybe I think Tiana's on the other side of this. Maybe I can get your details.
But please, let's hang out. Let's have a beer. Let's get really nerdy about old musicians.
That sounds good, Frank. Love it. Okay, thanks a lot, mate. Take care.
All right, cheers, man. All the best.
Thank you, David. I'll send you an email.
Oh, also, just very quickly, David, look up Imbalance from Grimsby.
I'll do that now. Yes. Cheers, mate.